Hi, everyone, and welcome to Practice Growth HQ, the weekly podcast for growth-minded healthcare professionals. Whether you're a dentist, physio, doctor, or other healthcare professional, we talk about what's required personally and professionally to get your practice growing faster. Now, my guest today, I'm delighted to have on Dr. Mark Costas. It's fair to say a lot of people are fairly hung up on money. The messages that we've, got from growing up, money doesn't grow on trees and all that sort of stuff. And I sort of find that often people are it's like two ends of the pendulum. It's either almost apologetic for wanting to make any money as though that's somehow not you're a bad person if you do it, or, you're not spiritual or whatever. And then on the other end is that sort of focus on money, excluding all those other things. And I guess you just get to a point and say, well, what's the point? Like all this money for what purpose? So really interesting observations there. I wanted to go back to something you said before, Mark, which is that when you I think you said you sort of pulled back from the business or whatever, that actually, and you improved these other parts of your life, that your businesses grew quite dramatically as a result of that.
Yeah.
Was it a matter of kind of getting out of the way, that you were the bottleneck for lots of things, and that by sort of handing those things over to others, that was able to help the growth?
Yeah. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. Those are the literal words that I've used to explain that period of my life. I literally got out of the way and I eliminated myself as the bottleneck in the business. Right. So organizational chart is really important. Building a competent team and having the confidence to delegate to that team is really important. Those are all steps that don't happen overnight. But organizational chart is very important. When I had those 6 original practices, 50 employees, they were all reporting directly to me, and I was still the main provider in 2 of those practices. So, I'm doing 50 hours of dentistry a day, and my phone is blowing up all day because I'm handling every managerial and administrative issue that's happening in all of my practices simultaneously, while I'm trying to provide this, micromillimeter precisional, surgery all day, every day. It's literally impossible. And at some point, the people that are hard chargers can make that work for a certain period of time, but everybody's going to be on a collision course with some sort of bad outcome if you try to continue that way. The only way to scale effectively is if you build a team around you, if you have an organizational chart that's actually effective, and you're able to elevate people, even if they're able to do the task that you could do at 100% to 85% of your ability. If you don't have to do it, that's got to be good enough. And if you're not okay with that, then that's fine. Just continue on with a single practice, have 6 employees, and make it the best darn practice that you possibly can. But if you ever want to scale beyond something about that size, you're going to need to learn how to delegate and be comfortable with that.
Yeah, I've heard it said, and the percentages vary a bit, but, let's call it 80% successfully done by someone else is 100% awesome.
Yeah.
Because it's like we struggle with that. We go, but they're 9 out of 10, but they're not quite 10 out of 10, but that's the price of, do you want to stay where you are, or do you want to move forward? And I think the other point that you made is so true. I mean, you and I are fairly aspirational individuals for different reasons, but, for some of the people listening here, like, their dream might only have been to just have a great practice, to be a sort of great practice where they're a sole practitioner and, they love the relationships that they form with their patients. They love the vibe of the place. They love how people feel when they leave. And if that's the case, like, that's totally fine. I mean, you get to decide what your dream is, but I suspect for many people, they may never have actually sat down and thought, well, what is my dream? Where do I want to get to? And importantly, why?
Yeah, interesting. It's so true, right? The first exercise that people have to do when they come in is the perfect practice exercise, and along with that perfect practice exercise, we ask what their personal life looks like when they get there. So if you were to close your eyes and imagine what your practice looked like when you were taking the keys, handing the keys over in exchange for a check for the next generation, for the person that was going to take over the practice that you have built up over several years or decades, right? What exactly does that look like to the T? Like how many treatment rooms? What color is it? What's the decor look like? What does your team look like? What does it feel like and smell like when you walk in there? What's the revenue? How many locations are there? And then what's your personal life look like? How's your primary relationship? How well adjusted are your children? What have you done with the excess time that you've liberated? What are you going to be doing next? What's your legacy? What's going to live on beyond your years? Those are the sorts of things that they have to come to the table with before we'll do a single coaching call, because we want all of our coaches to be able to read that document and say, okay, here's what you're currently doing. Here's where you say you want to be in 25 years. What are you doing to move your practice in that direction? Does it agree with your vision? All of your difficult business and personal and moral and ethical decisions become very, very clear when you have a clear vision. And if you don't, then every single decision is a very, very difficult one, because you don't have a North Star, you don't have a guiding light.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think, frankly, for everybody listening to this, regardless of what you do as a result of listening to this podcast, that exercise, I'm not sure where you need to go to do that, somewhere where you're not going to be interrupted. Maybe go and sit in the lobby of a hotel somewhere and switch your phone off or whatever. But to go through that exercise is super important. I see that at a much more granular level from a marketing point of view, where practices are really clear on the type of patient that they want to attract, then it makes their marketing so much easier. As you say, it's their North Star. It's like, one of the clients I was dealing with recently, they said, a pharmacy has come to us and, we can place an ad on a calendar that goes on the refrigerator. And it's only because we've already done the work and we know who their ideal client is. And guess what? They're in their sort of mid 50s to 60s. And I'll say, well, actually, for that business, that small investment probably makes sense, because that's the generation that they still have calendars, in a physical form rather than, more likely to. I'm not, casting aspersions, but I think you get the point. And it's only because well, this is the ideal client for this practice. We know who they are. We've given them a name. We know what their occupation is. We know where they live. That when these opportunities come up, you say, well, just look at them through that lens. Are they a fit or not? Is it, I think we should do some advertising at a local, skateboard park. Probably not. That's not a good match. So I think that as a first step for people, that sounds critical. Look, Mark, as we begin to wrap up, as I say, I feel like we could talk for hours, but I think I'm curious personally, and I'm sure the listeners will be, in light of everything you've done. What's next for you?
Yeah, we just did. We call them mastermind meetings. We just had our last mastermind meeting in Kansas City last week. And I led this really powerful exercise where we put together our life plans, our 10, 5, and 1 year life plan. And prior to giving a lecture on it, I kind of wrote out my own life plan. And if you guys have never done that, a 10-year life plan, it's a lot like the ideal practice exercise, but it's not just business. It's what your personal life looks like. It's what your net worth is going to be like, what you're going to be doing with your days in 10 years. And a big part of that, especially for type A's, is to really, really take time to reflect what your legacy is going to be. It's interesting because I journal every single day, and I was looking back at some of my journals in preparation for this exercise, and it came to light that in my fifth decade, now I'm starting to think about things that I thought about, when I was early in my career. One of the things that I always intended to do, because I do a lot of clinical missionary work in third world countries, one of the things that I always intended to do was to create my own 501c3, my own nonprofit, and create physical facilities around the world, right? I want to have one in the Philippines because my family is from the Philippines. There's a lot of need there. I want to do one in the Dominican Republic because that's where I go every year to deliver my missionary work, and there's no permanent facility that I've ever worked at there. I want to do one in Mexico. I want to do one in Zimbabwe because I have a couple of members that are from Zimbabwe and they have some land there. So, my goal now is to get that first physical facility, use my, influence that I've built in the United States in my profession to gather up enough kind of leverage and donations to build these clinics around. So instead of, saying that I want my consulting company to 10x in the next 10 years, that to me is great, but I already have everything that I need from a material standpoint. I don't need anything else. I have a beautiful house in a small town. I have a vehicle that gets me around, and I have an airplane that flies me there. So I'm fine. And my kids all have their college educations paid off. And I have plenty of money in the retirement account. I don't have to work anymore if I don't want to. So what is the point of 10xing this thing for more zeros in the bank account? I want to be able to leverage what I've built for good around the world. So I've doubled down, and we're starting to look at properties. We're going to start in Mexico. We're looking at a couple of them there. The idea is that we would have a space big enough for a clinical facility and a dorm space where the volunteer docs and assistants would be able to stay while they were volunteering their time there. And then we could pay a full-time, some locals full-time to care for the clinic when nobody was there. So that's the next iteration of what I want. I think that's going to be my legacy when I'm gone. That is what turns me on about clinical work now, is doing it for free and not necessarily charging people for it, and doing it for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to enjoy it. So that's the next iteration of what my purpose is. And obviously, in order to do that, it gives me more of a reason to build my influence in the profession. And the more people that find out about the podcast, they're going to hear me talking about this, and hopefully they'll donate money, and they'll be able to come and volunteer in one of these clinics.
Yeah, what a great vision. I really love that. Let's face it, that allows you to lean on what you know and what you do. It's not as though you setting out to do something that's completely out of your sphere of influence. I can imagine your various members, to be frank, I'm sure there'd be many of them who'd be very keen to actually go and do the missions down there. And then through the power of industry, I suppose you can lean on various parties. Who knows? Like a major sponsor, if you're listening today. I don't know, but my assumption is that in these developing nations, that the cost of actually running a practice like that is probably relatively modest once you've got the accommodation sorted out.
That's exactly right. I mean, most of the supplies when I go on mission trips is donated from some of the major suppliers, and I have very, very good relationships with them because I will say that Dental Success Network, with our 1,100 members, our collective revenue inside with those practices that are members of the network is about $1.3 billion. So you can imagine that every vendor in the United States wants to do business with us because that is a big footprint. We intend to 10x that over the next 10 years, but with that growth comes more deep relationships with every vendor that will eventually be able to help the nonprofit as well. So it's growth not just for growth's sake, but growth for an actual true purpose. That's going to improve the lives of many.
Well, I think that seems like a good place to finish, Mark. That is, I really love that vision, and I actually just can't wait to hear how that goes. that sense of that deeper legacy and purpose is it certainly ticks a few boxes, doesn't it? Well, look, Mark, I'm really delighted to get you on the podcast today. You've delivered so much. I said at the beginning, I thought you're very generous in your that you've got that humility and that curiosity. And the other thing, I guess, is I've always felt you've been very open about kind of what you do and what's worked and what hasn't. So I'm sure the listeners have got a lot out of this. Now, for people who want to learn more, Mark, about the various things you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thank you so much for this platform, Angus. I really appreciate it. You can find me on Facebook. You can find us on the Dental Success Institute. It's a private Facebook group. Just ask for admittance and I'll let you in. It's a great, positive community. Obviously, the Dentalpreneur podcast, I've done over 1,300 episodes, and we are a 5-day-a-week podcast. We talk about all things business, and it doesn't have to be just for dentistry. All healthcare professions listen to the podcast. Well, over 5.5 million downloads. In 150 countries is the listenership. So come on over and listen there. Also Instagram, Dr. Mark Costes, Costes. And if you're interested in any of those exercises, the legacy exercise, or the perfect practice exercise, I'd be happy to share that with you guys. Just go to info@truedentalsuccess.com and put the word legacy in the subject line, and I'll email those out to you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Mark. Really appreciate your time.
All right, Angus.
All right, so everyone, we've covered a lot in that interview, and while that knowledge is great, it's really applied knowledge that makes all the difference, isn't it? So my question usually is, what's one initial step that you can take right now as a result of what you've heard today? And to be frank, I think Mark's made it very clear. If you're not emailing him with the word legacy, I'm not sure. I mean, I can only assume that's because you've already got that sorted. Many of you probably don't. But make sure you do that thing now before you go on to the next thing. Now, look, finally, if you got some value from today, I'd really appreciate it if you'd head to where you heard this show and leave us a lovely 5-star rating to give us the encouragement so we can bring you more great content. Otherwise, catch you next time.